Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of Doggerland Maps, how we reconstructed a sunken world from seismic data. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. For most of human prehistory, the North Sea did not exist. In its place stood a landscape larger than modern Scotland, a rolling plain of rivers, wetlands, and forests, home to vast herds of animals and tens of thousands of Mesolithic people who hunted, fished, and built communities in a world that has now been under 60 meters of water for 8,000 years. We call it Doggerland, and we know it existed because the oil industry mapped it. Beginning in the 1980s and accelerating through the 1990s, North Sea oil companies conducted extensive seismic surveys of the seabed, sending sound waves through the sediment to map the geology beneath. Those surveys were done to find hydrocarbons, but the data also captured, in extraordinary detail, the three-dimensional structure of a submerged landscape, its river valleys, its lake basins, its coastal ridges. In 2009, archaeologist Vincent Gaffney published the first systematic map of Doggerland using that data. A lost world came into focus. What did it look like? Who lived there? And how did it end? This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the broader phenomenon of lost civilizations, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. For as long as human beings have told stories, they have told stories about what was lost. Every great culture on Earth carries myths of a golden age, a time before the current order, when civilization stood taller, knew more, and reached further than anything that came after. For centuries, scholars categorized these stories as allegory, comforting fictions invented by cultures to explain the gap between their aspirations and their achievements. But a quiet revolution in archaeology, geology, and oceanography has changed that calculus. The evidence now accumulating from seafloors, ice cores, and ancient texts is demanding a fundamental revision of the human story, one in which the line between myth and memory is far thinner than we imagined. The conventional timeline of civilization holds that complex urban society first emerged in Mesopotamia around 3,500 BC. Before that, scattered farming villages, nomadic hunter-gatherers, and nothing more. But this tidy narrative has been challenged repeatedly by anomalous discoveries that do not fit the accepted sequence. Megalithic structures dated to 10,000 BC or earlier. Astronomical alignments encoded in monuments by cultures supposedly too primitive to understand the sky. Mathematical ratios embedded in architecture that would not be formally derived for thousands of years. These discoveries are not fringe fabrications. They are measured, published, and debated in peer-reviewed literature. They point toward a past far more complex than the textbooks describe. What happens when a civilization falls? Most of its knowledge disappears. The libraries burn, the engineers die, the farmers abandon the fields. Within a generation or two, the grandchildren of architects are living in the ruins of buildings they cannot build. We know this happened in the Bronze Age collapse of 1200 BC, when a networked civilization spanning the Mediterranean was destroyed in a matter of decades. We know it from the fall of Rome. History is not a steady march of progress. It is punctuated by catastrophic resets, after which humanity must begin again. The question is whether some of those resets happened far earlier than we know, and whether their traces are still waiting to be found beneath our feet. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades, and patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter, the core evidence surrounding Doggerland Maps. How we reconstructed a sunken world from seismic data is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Doggerland Mapping Project was led by Vincent Gaffney of the University of Bradford, using seismic survey datasets provided by oil companies operating in the North Sea. The data, originally collected for petroleum exploration, contains enough resolution to reveal river valleys, lake basins, coastal ridgelines, and wetland zones in the submerged landscape. The project published its first major synthesis as Europe's Lost World, the rediscovery of Doggerland in 2009. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly, it is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the reconstructed Doggerland landscape was comparable in size and ecological diversity to modern Scotland. It featured a central freshwater lake, designated Dogger Lake by the research team, fed by river systems draining from both the British landmass and mainland Europe. The landscape included rich wetland environments that would have supported dense populations of red deer, aurochs, wild boar, and waterfowl, exceptional hunting and fishing territory for Mesolithic communities. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this. And that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. North Sea fishing trawlers have been recovering Mesolithic artifacts from the seabed for over a century. The assemblage includes flint blades, antler harpoon points, amber beads, and bone tools. The most remarkable single find is a Neanderthal skull fragment recovered from the Zealand Ridges area of the southern North Sea, dated to between 40,000 and 60,000 years ago, confirming that Doggerland was occupied by Neanderthals long before modern humans arrived in Europe. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, Doggerland was not inundated in a single catastrophe, but drowned progressively as sea levels rose following the end of the last ice age beginning around 10,000 BC. The highest remaining ground, a plateau now called Dogger Bank, persisted as a large island until approximately 6,500 to 6,200 BC. The Storegga Slide, a massive submarine landslide off the Norwegian coast, generated a tsunami around 6,200 BC that is believed to have inundated the remaining lowlands of Dogger Bank in a matter of hours. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of artifacts recovered from trawlers and targeted seabed sampling have been radiocarbon dated to between 7,000 and 9,000 years old, confirming that the objects were deposited when the area was dry land. The assemblage is consistent with Mesolithic hunter-gatherer communities of the type documented across contemporary Northern Europe and Britain. These are the material remains of people displaced by one of the most dramatic environmental changes in European prehistory. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding: ancient DNA from Mesolithic populations in Britain and Northern Europe has been systematically analyzed over the past decade. The genetic profiles of British Mesolithic individuals show close affinity with continental European Mesolithic populations, consistent with a shared ancestry in Doggerland before the inundations separated the British landmass from Europe around 6,500 BC. The Doggerland population did not disappear. Their descendants survive in the modern gene pool. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain Doggerland Maps, how we reconstructed a sunken world from seismic data. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation, proposed by researchers, holds that Doggerland supported a substantial Mesolithic population, likely tens of thousands of people across its full extent, who were progressively displaced southward and eastward by rising seas over several thousand years, ultimately migrating into what is now Britain, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany. The Storegga tsunami around 6,200 BC was the final catastrophic event. This is the mainstream view, supported by the artifact record and by ancient DNA showing genetic continuity between Doggerland-associated populations and later British and Northern European Mesolithic people. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence. But it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the Doggerland inundation is the real historical basis for Northern European flood mythology, including elements of various Atlantic and Norse traditions describing a lost land under the sea. Under this hypothesis, the memory of Doggerland's drowning was preserved in oral tradition for thousands of years and surfaces in mythological fragments. The objection is that the time gap between the inundation and the earliest recorded myths is very large, making direct transmission difficult to confirm. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the Doggerland population can be specifically traced in the genetic record of modern Western European populations, particularly in Britain and the Low Countries. Ancient DNA analysis suggests that Mesolithic hunter-gatherer ancestry from Doggerland was partially absorbed into later Neolithic farming populations rather than entirely replaced. The objection is that distinguishing Doggerland ancestry from broader Mesolithic European ancestry requires sample sizes not yet available. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding Doggerland Maps, how we reconstructed a sunken world from seismic data, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes Gaffney et al. Europe's Lost World 2009 published the first systematic reconstruction of Doggerland using oil company seismic data, revealing river valleys up to 10 meters deep, lake basins, coastal features, and estuary systems across an area now 60 meters below sea level. The data quality is sufficient to identify specific landscape types and to model what vegetation and animal communities the area would have supported during the Mesolithic period. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented trawler artifacts from across the North Sea constitute a distributed archaeological collection now held in museums in Rotterdam, Leiden, and Cambridge. Radiocarbon dating confirms Mesolithic ages for the majority of objects. The Zealand Ridges Neanderthal fragment, dated 40,00060, 000 years BP, establishes that the Doggerland area was inhabited across multiple periods of human prehistory, not only during the Mesolithic. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the Storegga tsunami deposit has been identified in multiple Scottish sediment cores as a distinct layer of marine sand dated to 150 plus or minus 250 years BP. The deposit confirms a major tsunami struck the British coast at the time Dogger Bank was still partially above sea level, providing physical evidence for the catastrophic inundation event. Sea level reconstruction models from ice core and satellite geodesy data independently confirm the timing of Doggerland's final submergence. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding Doggerland Maps, how we reconstructed a sunken world from seismic data. Now, we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked. in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Gaffney project continues with higher resolution seismic data and targeted seabed coring to recover organic materials for radiocarbon dating. The Rijksmuseum van Oudheden in Leiden opened a Doggerland exhibition in 2023, bringing the story to a wider audience. North Sea wind farm construction has produced accidental Doggerland discoveries. Cable laying and foundation work regularly disturbs Mesolithic deposits on the seabed. Doggerland is now a flagship case in underwater cultural heritage management and a model for how seismic data from industrial sources can be repurposed for archaeological reconstruction. Climate change analogs from Doggerland, the speed and scale of coastal inundation, are directly cited in current sea level rise research. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of Doggerland Maps, how we reconstructed a sunken world from seismic data, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Doggerland ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.